Who wrote the Gospel of Luke? This is something that the critics love to bring up, that we don't know who the authors are of the synoptics. So let's start off with the Gospel of Luke and who wrote it. Yes, it's true that the author of Gospel of Luke doesn't announce himself as the author, but one thing that we do know, whoever authored Acts also authored the Gospel of Luke. So let's have a look. The first manuscript evidence for the Gospel of Luke with the title Kata Lukan, which translates to the Gospel according to Luke, is Papyrus 75, which has been dated to the 3rd century, which is approximately about 125 years after it thought it had been written. And yes, that's a large time gap, but in the space of historicity of certain documents, it's actually very, very, very close. We do have early church father Eusebius from the 3rd and 4th century who actually wrote on who authored Luke. Let's take a look at what he said. Luke, being by birth one of the people of Antioch, by profession and a physician, having been with Paul a good deal and having associated intimately with the rest of the apostles, has left us examples of the art of curing souls that he obtained from them in 2 divinely inspired books, the Gospel, which he testifies that he wrote even as they delivered to him, from who the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, all of whom, he says, had followed even from the beginning, and the Acts of the Apostles, which he had composed, receiving his information with his own eyes, no longer by hearsay. We also have records that Eusebius quoted Irenaeus, who actually attributed the authorship to Luke. Irenaeus existed in the 2nd century. It's one of the closest sources we have. However, we have a lot of Irenaeus' works because Eusebius preserved them in the Greek. Now we're going to get to the famous we passages. This is one of the scholarly points that is heavily debated as to whether or not Luke authored the actual Gospel of Luke, and we're going to dig into it right now. But just before we get into the we passages, let's take a look at all the times Paul mentioned Luke in his own writings. Colossians 4:14, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. 2 Timothy 4:11, only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for ministry. Philemon 1:24, and so do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, and Luke, my fellow workers. And it is noteworthy here that Philemon is the only one that's considered a part of the undisputed Pauline corpus. So in terms of a critical perspective, it wouldn't really be accepted amongst the critics for Colossians or Timothy to be used as an example of Paul actually having Luke as a companion. However, the fact that Luke is mentioned in Philemon as a part of the undisputed corpus establishes that Paul did know someone called Luke. In the prologue to the Gospel of Luke, the author seems to identify himself as a 2nd-generation Christian relying on others' eyewitness testimonies. He therefore cannot be counted among the apostles. Throughout the book of Acts, when describing Paul's activities, the narrator occasionally shifts from the third to the first person plural we. There's examples of this in Acts 16:10-17, Acts 20:5-15, Acts 21:1-18, Acts 27:1 to Acts 28:16. What the scholars are saying is that the author of the Gospel of Acts and the Gospel of Luke mentions quite a lot of Paul's companions. So what the scholars are suggesting is this: the fact that Paul knows Luke, if Luke were to be writing this, he is recording a lot of actual Paul's companions, which Paul affirms in his own epistles. But Luke wouldn't write about himself in the third person. It wouldn't make any sense. If I was writing a letter to you, I wouldn't say that you and Matt were actually on a journey together. I'd say we were on a journey together. This is how they established that Luke, being one of Paul's companions, who doesn't mention himself in the Acts of the Apostles, who wasn't a part of the Apostles but a companion with Paul, is referred to as the author of the Acts. Therefore, he must be the author of the Gospel of Luke as well. Now, this idea I didn't come up with. Actually, the first person to record it was Irenaeus. The church father Irenaeus was one of the first to interpret these we passages as evidence that Luke was a companion of Paul. But this Luke was inseparable from Paul and his fellow worker in the Gospel he himself makes clear, not boasting of it, but compelled to do so by truth itself. Now, there's obviously a lot of debate about the we passages, along with Luke and authorship for the Gospel of Luke. The issue that we've got is when we actually pull together all the evidence that we have, where we have manuscript evidence within 125 years of when it was allegedly written. We have early church fathers recording history down as to attributing Lucan authorship to the Gospel of Luke. And then we actually have internal evidence as to the we passages. When we put this together, it's not unreasonable to say that Luke actually wrote that Gospel. Why? When we compare it using the same methodology to other histories, it gets very interesting. The famous Greek philosopher is accepted to have been written by Plato himself, and the earliest manuscript evidence that we have is fragmentary from Plato's Republic from the 1st century in Papyrus 843. Now, the oldest complete manuscript that we have is from Codex Clarke 39, which dates back to the 9th century AD, which is approximately 1500 years after Plato. Now, one of the earliest reliable sources for Plato authorship is the Roman historian Senator Cicero, which dates back to 43 BC to 100 BC. He attributes Plato as the author. So this is the issue that we have. Plato is accepted to have written the Republic, but when we look at the earliest manuscript evidence we have, it is approximately 1500 years after it is written. And if we go to other sources, earlier sources attributing the authorship to Plato, such as Cicero, those manuscripts also date back to the century AD, which is approximately 1,000 years after the event. And yet, we don't question Plato writing the Republic. So by that own methodology, if we question with all the evidence we have for Luke writing the Gospel of Luke, and we say that is inconclusive, there is no way we can establish that Plato actually wrote the Republic, and this is the issue that we have. And there was a brilliant debate between Dr. James White and Dr. Bart Ehrman when he actually brings up this point. When he uses sources, and other critical scholars uses sources such as Josephus in order to question the reliability of the New Testament, when those sources don't actually meet the test that they criticize the New Testament with. And that's the issue that they do have. Really, the Bible is the standard by which if we measure something is historically accurate or not, because there's more evidence for the Bible than there is other histories that we have. So thanks for watching this. If you do disagree or you like the video, feel free to subscribe, leave a comment. If you disagree, which I get a lot of negative feedback here on YouTube, but I'm happy to look at all the comments fairly. Feel free to leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.